All right. So I am accompanied by my very good friend who I am going to refer to as Bandit today. We have been friends since high school. And so I am going to ask you, Bandit, to say a little bit about what is your interest, if any, in gender?
Well, it's just not something I know about, but apparently it's something that is the most important thing to a lot of people who I'm pretty sure never thought of it before a couple of years ago. There's a whole spectrum of things that are on the public consciousness now that I don't understand. And I don't understand why some people are taking certain positions. And so, really, I'm curious because I don't have a lot of experience and I just want to know more.
Okay, excellent. And I just wanted to give the listeners a little background that we've been friends for a long time and we were catching up and I told you about the podcast and so you listened to a few episodes and you graciously told me this would be way more interesting in a conversation. So I said, "All right, come along then. Let's have a conversation."
And here we are.
See, here we are. So, you've heard a few episodes. You just give us a little bit about your background or fair to say lack thereof. You often tell me you're an ignoramus, I think are your words.
And in a lot of areas.
Well, I'm gonna stick to my expertise because so am I. What would you like to ask me? If you can ask me any question on gender,
Okay. All right.
what would you ask me?
The big question is, how did we get here? Like,
Mm.
how did we get to a place where apparently the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department is making sure that trans kids don't participate in sports? Like, how is it something that is now just the social equivalent of I don't even know what. Like they're taking it and making it something that I don't know. It feels like it's a little out of proportion. So so I guess that's my big question is why? How?
I'm gonna answer that, but just so that I'm clear, when you say little out of proportion, what do you mean?
What I mean is there are a lot of issues in the world. There's a lot of problems that affect a lot of people. I I don't know what the numbers are, but I
Mhm.
suspect that the numbers of trans kids playing high school sports are probably pretty small,
They are.
right? Okay.
Mhm.
So why is something that is and I'm not even talking about whether or not play, don't play, let them play, don't why is something that affects so few people, why do they care? Why is that such an issue that there are we got a lot of problems in this country. And I feel like maybe that's not one,
Okay.
but you got all these states passing laws, people are shouting from the rooftops. Why?
So the best way I can answer this, understanding that I would prefer it not be one of the big issues. So it's not my perspective, but I have the historical perspective, right? Because I've been educating for 12 years and I can tell you that around 2015, so about 10 years ago, that there was an attempt to ban transgender kids from sports about 10 years ago, and it didn't go anywhere. The closest it got was in Idaho. They did pass a ban for kids playing sports who were transgender, and it got stopped in the courts immediately. No other state took it on, and it just died. That was the end of that. And so you have to ask yourself, well, how did we get from that to here in 10 years? And so what I do know is a lot of money was put into working on campaigning about research of realizing that it actually was an issue that they could get people behind, is my understanding. It was a political issue that would move people to vote in favor conservatively, and that they did research to find the language and the way in which it got people to get behind it. So the idea of protecting women, of fairness in sports, all of that kind of language is a way of what you're expressing and what you're saying to move people. I think that's where it began. It's a political strategy to ignore, I would offer, and of course, I'm displaying my political views, but to ignore the other areas that might be, to your point, of more concern, to be like, well, let's just don't look over there, but let's look over here, right? We got to protect the women. We got to keep sports fair and those kind of things. I think some of the other people that have gone on to support it, many people on both sides of the aisle. Sports, I think, in particular, moves people. I think people have different feelings on sports, and you use the word fair in sports, it really gets people. And I think this picture that they display of like, when they talk about it, I think people are imagining John Cena in a dress playing sports. That's kind of the image that they are giving instead of the fact that A, there's no definition of fairness given. B, people's ability of all sexes and genders, and I'm using those two separately. If we're going to look at the biology, sexes, we're going to look at gender, varies greatly. I mean, I think we can imagine in school, like I wasn't very athletic. So people had much greater abilities than I did in sports. I didn't go around going, well, that's not fair. There's just a variety of ability within groups, but nobody's defining what fair is, mind you. We just say it's not fair, and because of this image that people bring up, they go, "Hey, yeah, I bet you that's not fair," right? But nobody's defining what fair is or proving that it's not fair.
Okay, well, it actually makes sense. Like I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that
No, you don't have to.
the manipulation, I understand. Like if that's what it is, that's kind of genius on their part. If you're no, seriously though, if you're going to people riled up, that's I didn't think of it that way, but I guess that's great and gross.
And it's worked, but I also want to give some compassion to the people that there are people with true feeling on it that have been, to use your word, manipulated, that truly believe in this and then that we're not part of that political agenda, but now their feelings are invested in it and they believe it. And it's like, how do you educate? But go ahead.
Okay, but then take it away from the sports. When we were living in a southern state a few years ago, they went after the places with the drag brunch. Right? Like, again, what? Really? And I know it's not the same thing, but it's the same neighbor.
Right.
And it seems to be just they're lumping everything together. And still, why do we care? Why are people getting so bent out of shape, so excited, so frothy? I don't get it.
Well, again, you're asking me to see somebody else's perspective, which lucky for you, I do quite regularly. Just to be very clear, it's not my perspective. However, what
You're
I
studying it.
but if I'm studying it and I listen to people, like I'm glad you're seated, but I listen to Ben Shapiro. I listen to
Really?
I do. I try to listen to people that have different perspectives than I do
Yes.
so that I can understand. So
Yes.
what I'm going to say about things like drag brunch or reading time is there's this belief that there's some sort of corruption, that somehow it's going to make children, what's the word? Like it's
Okay.
going to, there's gay or immoral, it's homophobic, it's transphobic, all these things, which is kind of interesting because most of the world is so heteronormative or, heterosexual presenting. And it's like somehow we have gay people with heterosexuality like all up in our faces. So why do you think like seeing a drag queen is going to change that? I think people have confused that acceptance and visibility has made people able to be themselves sooner and more openly. But I think people have taken that. People are saying, "Hey, I'm transgender. I am who I am," to be, well, it must be because they saw a drag queen. Like, it's like, no, it's not. Representation allows people to see themselves and be themselves, which is a beautiful thing, but it's misunderstood. I was just thinking of a story I once heard. I was working with a parent of a transgender child, and they were telling this story that they were really worried. They had a transgender son, so that child had been assigned female at birth. And they had this toy from when that child was little, this pink car that the child rode in, had one of those handles that you push the kid around and that they could sit and buckle up, but the kid was too big for it. But this parent had a young child that was assigned male at birth, and I think the kid was 1 or 2 years old. And they didn't wanna buy a new toy, so they were putting the boy in this pink car and pushing it around, and this parent was like, "Oh my goodness, are people gonna think I'm making my two-year-old transgender because I'm putting this boy in the pink car?" And she told me that her best friend was like, "Well, it didn't work for your oldest, so why do you think it's gonna work, you know, for the kid that was assigned female at birth? That didn't work, so why do you think it's gonna work for this one?"
And on the flip side, my daughter used to dress my son up when they were little. She would make him wear her clothes and put makeup on him just for fun. And now he's trying to sneak girls into the house. So yeah,
Did you have any issue when your
did
daughter
I
used
have
to
any
dress?
issue with him sneaking girls in the
No.
house? Yes, I did.
I'm not a parenting coach. I wanna know if you had any issue when your daughter used to put
No,
him in.
because they were little and it was fun. She did the thing where she put his hair up in one of those little ties, and it was like he looked like Pebbles Flintstone. It was yeah, and everything turned out. He was now I had to had to put cameras outside the house to catch him because he was figuring out where the blind spots were. So he was like sneaking them in, and
Oh, you're talking about now with the girls
yeah,
coming
now
in.
with the girl. So I'm pretty sure there's no link. Like, I understand correlation isn't causation, but so yeah. So
Yes. So back to your question about
yeah.
why are people so up in arms about, again, it's what I call the narrative. And I call it the narrative because I think of it as a political strategy or a strategy. Maybe it's not necessarily political, but people tell this story of like, this is corrupting kids. And why would you expose kids to this? And seeing it as a problem where many people see it as acceptance of all things and representation of all expressions and identities allows people to be themselves. So, just different ways of seeing things.
I had a lot of questions. I don't know.
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Like, and again, this is coming from a place of 100% ignorance.
And I just want to say you can ask, use any
And I don't
language
want
you
to,
want.
I don't want it to come off as offensive.
That's okay.
Yeah. When you're dealing with kids, like kids, not
Mhm.
even late teens, but like kids, how do you know? A good
Yeah.
friend of mine, his kid came out when I guess she was like a senior in high school, I think.
Okay.
So at that point, I understand you're a little more in touch with who you are. Tell me about dealing with young kids. How does that process go?
I don't think there's one way, but I think we're talking about kids that are before puberty, right?
Yeah.
When you talk to the parents or guardians, there's been multiple things by the time they're seeking help because a lot of times they've dismissed things. Like they say the craziest things, right? They say the silliest things. And a lot of times they've been disregarded until something's grown. Sometimes the children get really, really depressed and they've expressed, I'm a girl. Why can't I wear these clothes? They're drawn to certain toys, they're upset, they put up a fight. When clothing is very gendered in either way, and a kid's forced to wear very gendered clothing, that seems to be one of the real big pushes. So for transgender boys, meaning assigned female at birth, you may see that with clothing less because it's more acceptable for a quote girl to wear shorts and pants and t-shirts. But there are a lot of stories of the younger kids, and I think it's less now, but the younger kids' clothes are very gendered, even if shorts, pants, everything. But if you go into that age group of clothing, the quote girls' clothes are mainly pink, mainly purple. They're mainly bows or sparkly or pleated, like things that are very specific to what we consider feminine clothing. So clothing's very gendered, so kids tend to fight that more. The other way it's come out is a lot of times kids will say, I am a, not I feel like, I am a boy, or conversations like, when is God going to give me a penis? Or when is God going to take my penis away? Those comments really get parents' attention. Why did God make a mistake? I've talked to so many parents. So there are these quotes. Those are the ones that really get their attention of like, what is going on? But a lot of times there's a lot of things, and the young kids, they're mainly conversation and going to express. There's nothing, and I think this is the big misunderstanding. For kids before puberty, there is nothing being done except if they want to use a different name, if they want to use,
Nothing being done.
well, because a lot of times it said, oh, so you're mutilating kids, like surgery, hormones, none of that. There's no hormones, there's no medication, there's no surgery being done on kids prior to puberty. So when we talk about kids prior to puberty transitioning, it's a social transition. We're talking about kids having a name change, which a lot of kids get a name change that aren't transgender. So kids might change their name, they might change their pronouns, they might change their hair, grow their hair, cut their hair. They might. These are all mights. And if you think about name, hair, clothes might change, anybody can do that, really. The pronouns might be the biggest thing that maybe somebody who's not transgender wouldn't change. But that's what we're talking about. So they're all very reversible things. And so I think for that reason, a lot of parents, again, it's over time, it's with discussions with professionals and experts, but a lot of times it's like, okay, the kid will say, call me he or call me she. And so it's like, what's the harm in doing that? People can't see you, but your mouth is open going, I don't know.
I don't know what the harm is in doing that, but apparently it's a big deal, right? Like,
Again, looking at both sides the way that I do, I know some parents worry, what if we do this and then they change their mind? How will they be seen? How will the kid be seen, as well as how will the parents and the family be seen by their other family members, by the community? Will they be seen as crazy? Will they be seen? I think there's a lot of that that goes
it sort
on.
of touches on another question that I had about, because you hear their talking points, and some of the talking points are the kids really don't want it. The kids are unhappy afterwards, or they want to change, go back, whatever. How accurate is that? And does that, is it, assume that it does actually happen, but is it,
Yes.
I mean, is it, oh, we talk 100%, 50%?
So
Is that an important point?
So the way I always look at that is that the numbers, there's the best data we have, it's about 2.5%. So 97.5% of kids, and this was a longitudinal study. They looked at kids that transitioned at a young age prior to puberty, and then they followed them out for quite some time. And I don't have the study right in front of me, so I don't remember what the median years were when they reported this. But a lot of the kids had gotten into medical transition by that time. And so out of that 2.5% that transitioned to specifically retransitioned to what they were assigned at birth. The reason I say specifically, because some people might have, say they transitioned to identify as a boy, they might have transitioned again to identify as non-binary. So that's not included in that 2.5%. So anyone that transitioned back to what they identified at birth, 97.5% did not identify as what they assigned at birth. And that 2.5% they found were typically kids that transitioned very young, usually around, I think the average age was 6 or younger. And I think most of them retransitioned to what they identified at birth by the age of 10, meaning before any medical intervention had been done. So that is one study. Most studies are fairly consistent around that 2% mark. And in medicine, like I give the analogy, because as you know, my husband's a cardiologist, and he's like, we do low risk heart bypass. So low risk meaning a person has no other health issue but their heart disease. And a bypass will be 98% chance their life will be better, they'll have a better quality of life, they'll live longer. 2% chance, similar, 2% chance they will die. Nobody is saying, well, we can't do that surgery because 2% will die. Most people actually choose the surgery. But we hear with this, we're like, 2% might retransition. We better not do this because of that 2%. Now, the other part that I think we're forgetting is for the people that retransition, there's an assumption that there's regret. Regret rate is different than retransition rate. And the little bit of data that we have on regret rate is that it's even lower than those that retransition, meaning everyone that retransitions does not necessarily regret it. There are definitely people that do regret it. That number is not 0, but everybody doesn't regret it.
Interesting. It's
Yeah, you would think it was 90% regret it.
here because again, my exposure is the people on the TV, right? Like there's not, and there's no nuance, and there's no, especially now, there's no even attempt to be honest.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned nuance because I think in a lot of these discussion, nuance is left out. I'm not saying that we even ignore the people that retransition. I think it's important to understand why did they retransition? Was there something that could have been done differently along the way? I think those stories are important. Regret rate, it's important to understand. But there's a priority too. And when 97.5%, and this is the study for those interested from Dr. Christina Olson. But there's other studies out there that basically have very similar data. This is an excellent study, but there's other ones with very similar data. But I had a comment in one of my podcasts that was on YouTube saying, oh, no big deal that this small percentage remove their genitals. And it's like, but that's the other misconception. Everyone that transitioned doesn't get a surgical transition. Not everyone that transitioned wants a surgical transition.
What are those numbers? Just out of curiosity, because
That get a surgical transition?
well, or that don't want one. And just
Oh, I have no idea. That's because that gets challenging because a lot of people don't have access to it. So some people want them and can't pay for it or don't have coverage for it. So that gets complicated. But I can only speak anecdotally because I have friends who are transgender and I do know some are like, no, thank you. I like my parts. And I have others that are like, if I could pay for it, they would be gone yesterday. Right. Like, so it varies.
I mean, this something else I didn't know, right? Like, because not around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's my other big issue with this discussion is so many people that are against it have never met a transgender person or had a conversation with a transgender person. And I would argue more than one would be good too, right? But even just getting to know somebody and understanding, it's not even there. So,
I,
okay.
you know, I was around some fellas there that, you know, little older, little less exposed to the world. That, I mean, they just go through the talking points though, but they don't understand its people, and
Right.
we miss that. It's Makes me sad.
You wanted to ask me about the teacher in Florida, you said?
Well, I mean, that's a whole nother topic of the whole, like, what are we going to let our kids do without parental consent?
Mm. You know what, Bandit?
Yes.
I wonder if we should table it. Are you willing to come back and have another
Of course, I'm willing to come
discussion?
back.
Well, Bandit, this has been a very good conversation. I'm so glad you came on here,
Yeah,
and
and
I'm
I have
glad that you.
more things in my book that we can talk about. Oh, did my own research.
Yeah, if I got paid for every time I heard that one, well, thank you.
Internet. It's all there. All there.
Research matters.